Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon in the Middle East. I'm Danny Seabright, President of the U.S.-UAE Business Council. Welcome to today's webinar with Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Arabian Gulf Affairs, Timothy A. Lenderking. We are pleased to have over 200 guests registered to attend today's call, comprising U.S. and UAE government officials, business executives, and thought leaders. Among some key guests logging on this morning, are Ambassador John Ricolta Jr., U.S. Consul General in Dubai, Philip Frame, former Ambassador Larry Silverman, and former Ambassador to Oman, my dear friend, Francis Cook. Thank you all for joining us today. I have been fortunate to work with Deputy Assistant Secretary Lenderking for many years now, and he has been a strong supporter of the Business Council and its work for quite some time. I therefore could not be more delighted to have Tim speak with us today. Tim will begin by making some brief opening remarks in which he will share some highlights of his recent trip to the Gulf, which was last week, where he was in Kuwait, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates. And he'll preview the upcoming strategic dialogue between the U.S. and the UAE, which will be inaugurated, if you will, on October 20. We will then have a fireside chat about some of the key issues of the day, including Iran and China. During this chat, I will ask some questions from the audience, so please submit any questions that you might have using the Q&A function. Should also note that this event is on the record, but closed to press. A video of the event will be posted on our website after the event has concluded. Without further ado, Deputy Assistant Secretary Tim Lenderking, the floor is yours.
Danny, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you guys once again. Always appreciate the invitation to join the U.S.-UAE Business Council. It's a vibrant organization, and you all are doing a terrific job to bring us even closer. So you, David, thank you very much. And to all of you who are joining us today, thanks. There are a lot of other competing topics one can be looking at today, but this is one I think that's very close to us, and delighted to hear of all those great ambassadors and former colleagues who are on the line as well. As Danny noted, I did just come back from a trip to the Gulf. It's my second visit out to the Gulf since the COVID started. There's no question that we feel the pinch and the constraint of being able to move around, and it's somewhat eerie to be traveling out there with so many airports that one associates with being packed as so lightly traveled. But you can still get a lot done. And I feel that even with the very strong parameters, which I see and respect, that the host countries in the Gulf place on COVID, we can have in-person meetings and be very aggressive about the social distancing. And for those of us, diplomats, doing diplomacy in person really makes a difference. And so, I was very glad to have a chance to spend time with our teams in the Middle East. And I can tell you all that you are very well represented, and your taxpayer money is well used for our leadership in the Gulf. And I thank Ambassador Ricolta and his team and our other colleagues in the Gulf for hosting me. Our friendship with the UAE, and indeed with the whole Middle East region, is really based on our view that we still continue to be a force for good in the Middle East, and we do remain the partner of choice in terms of our longstanding commitment to regional security and stability. And I think that's a principle that has been buffeted somewhat recently with some countries calling into question our commitment to the region. But I think as my trip alone illustrates, and those of my other colleagues around the interagency who are traveling to the Gulf, and the fact that we're kicking off this strategic dialogue here in about 2 weeks is in fact reflective of that commitment. And I think our partners continue to look to the United States for leadership and our involvement in confronting regional crises. Unfortunately, there are too many of those in the region. We do stand closely with our partners and allies as we address the threat of terrorism and Iran's regional influence. And I really think, and this comes out, I think, in the meetings that we have, no other country is capable of leading regional security efforts to address threats to global security, as well as the United States. It'll be no surprise to you as seasoned, watchers of the Gulf and the Middle East. It's been an extraordinary couple of months for the Gulf as we've seen our partners, move away from the conflicts and taboos of the past and commit to cooperation across a broad range of fields. And nothing could illustrate that better than I think than the signing of the Abraham Accords, September 15th, reflecting, attempt to dislodge some of the entrenched mentalities, move things in a new direction. Danny and I know we're both pleased to attend the ceremony at the White House on that sun-splashed afternoon. And it was great to see the four leaders up there shaking hands or I don't know if they actually shook hands, come to think of it, because of COVID, but standing together and proclaiming sort of a new era, and also the normalization of relations with Israel. So I think that was a very special thing, and it's our strong hope that the normalization of relations that we saw on September 15th will grow out and build and lead to more peace and security in the region and deepen opportunities to expand growth. And this, of course, includes bringing the Palestinians back to the table. I think that's something that we're very committed to. And I know from my conversations in the region that our Gulf partners are also committed to that as well. So let's not think that all of this can work without their participation. In the meantime, let's continue to power forward in the ways that we can. I think it's our view that opening direct ties between the Middle East, three of the Middle East's most dynamic societies and advanced economies, will help transform the region by spurring economic growth, enhancing technological innovation, and forging closer to people relations. And I think it's what we're already seeing in the first couple of weeks of this normalization is a warm peace. It has struck me how much energy there is on the Emirati side to move this forward, and how much energy there is on the Israeli side, the Bahrainis as well. And so, MOUs are being signed, contacts are being made, phone calls are happening. You saw Sheikh Abdullah, the foreign minister, yesterday with the Germans and with the Israelis at the Holocaust site. And these are the kinds of things that weren't possible even, a couple of months ago. So I think that, again, is reflected of the energy and the commitment and the intention that each of the countries is bringing to this process. We've seen air flights, as you know, from Israel into UAE for the first time. We've seen Saudi Arabia open its airspace so that flight could take place. And Saudi Arabia, I think, is being quite supportive behind the scenes, even if they have said publicly that, they may not be ready to normalize at this particular time. But their commitment, I think, to the process that we're seeing is there. And I was glad to see that the president and the king were able to speak about this just a couple of weeks ago. So part of my job and the purpose of my trip out last week was to, talk to our Gulf partners about moving forward on the Abraham Accords, ways that we can, work together to build on this monumental achievement, and also to talk specifically about the strategic dialogue with the Emirati leadership. We're very excited about the strategic dialogue. It's a very unique, I think, construct that we're putting together. Given the COVID constraints, we will start with a virtual engagement with the Secretary and Sheikh Abdullah on October 20th in the morning. And we built out a number of working groups. This is a rolling strategic dialogue, right? This is not a one day off and then, it's all packaged up and we move back to normal, sort of normal diplomacy. No, we're going to keep driving this forward, with some other working groups that we're planning that will really showcase, I think, the depth and the breadth of the U.S.-UAE relationship. So we're talking about those people-to-people connections. We're talking about the economic and commercial pieces. We're talking about the strategic space as well. So we're very excited about that conversation. We're also doing a strategic dialogue with the Saudis next week, and then we'll be talking to the Kuwaitis and receiving the Kuwaiti foreign minister later later in November. So, very exciting times. Bilateral trade is a key element in our relationship with the UAE, total trade surpassing $24 billion last year. The UAE continues to be America's top export trading partner in the Middle East and the Africa region. You all know that the UAE has an advanced and capable military. They're looking to bolster this capability through the Abraham Accords, and we want to be as supportive as we can, recognizing that there is a legitimate threat out there. We've seen the Iranians attack Saudi Arabia. We've seen a threat from the Houthis reach as far as the interior of the peninsula, and so these are kind of things that we have to be very careful about. We're also, using the Strat dialogue and these engagements to have very frank conversations with our partners and with the UAE in particular, as we confront, regional crises and really try to work together to maximize the points of convergence, minimize the points of divergence. And, one of the areas I'm sure we'll talk about later is China in the Middle East. And, our perception may be somewhat different from the Gulf countries. We see more of a threat here. We see China trying to move into the strategic space, and I would define that as telecommunications, port and infrastructure, intel arrangements, cyber cooperation. That is much more bigger and carries more strategic implication than the Belt and Road Initiative envisions. So, one of the messages that we're taking to the Emiratis is to work with us very closely and be very, very careful. Do your due diligence about China's engagement, and work with us so we don't, run into problems down the road where we can respect the Emiratis' need and desire to trade with a major partner like China and to build that relationship, but to be very careful of the strategic space. And finally, you had a chance to visit the Expo site once again, contrast it with, with a year ago when it was literally a hole in the ground, and to spend time with the Emirati officials who were leading this effort, our Expo team, Ambassador Rakolta. Our pavilion is almost complete, and thanks in large part to a lot of generosity and support from the Emiratis. But it's going to be a great platform. And we're tremendously excited. I am an Expo child myself, having been around a couple of Expos growing up. And one of the lenses through which I came to better appreciate, I think, the global perspective. But you've seen that this is going to be a major platform. I think we're waiting to see how the COVID piece shapes engagement, but we want to be there in a big way. And I think between the various elements of our pavilion and the entertainment aspects, you're going to see a great display from the United States. And so that's something that we're very excited about. Danny, let me pause there and kick it back to you with those few opening remarks. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Sure, Tim, and thank you very, very much for that wonderful tour d'horizon of where we stand in our relationships, particularly in the Gulf and between Israel. I have to offer you my most heartfelt congratulations, you, the team at the State Department, the White House, on the signing of the Abraham Accords. As you know very well, I've worked these issues for 30 years of my career, and to get to a place where we've made peace again between our Israeli and Arab friends and colleagues is really, really noteworthy and very, very important. Let's just unpack a little bit, a couple of issues with regard to that. For business, which is mainly what this call is focused on for the audience, coming out of the Abraham Accords, do you have any thoughts or recommendations for what American companies can do to help support, promote, create new alliances and bridges between Israel and the UAE? And maybe even just your review of the verticals that you know are important on the trilateral dialogues that are going on for business to be focused on. That would be helpful.
Sure. I think there's going to be a lot in this space, and I think it's going to start to burgeon. A big part of this is letting the two countries work together, because It's exciting to see these officials interact with each other uh, in a way that, right, there's not a lot of personal history here. And so the two countries are really getting to know each other in some ways, having studied each other for decades, but getting to know each other as people um, and leaderships. And I do think, again, that what I see is a tremendous amount of energy and indeed warmth. The Emiratis are quite well organized. That's not to say that there isn't a lot that's going to evolve over time, but I think the Emiratis are quite organized in terms of the things that they want to see. They're certainly looking toward a vibrant trading relationship with Israel. They're looking forward to partnering with Israel in areas of common endeavor. They've talked about COVID. They've talked about pharmaceuticals. They've talked about desalinization. Pure greening the desert. I mean, these are obviously very relevant topics for the Gulf countries. So I think those are low-hanging fruit in a sense. And going to be the obvious places where the relationship would start. But you look at the banking opportunities, both in Dubai and in the other Emirates. We're seeing those being explored also on the side with the Bahrainis. That's quite exciting. I think you'll see some, obviously, given the difficulties of COVID, some challenges here, but that there will be tourism. I know, talking to Israeli friends, they're keen to get out and explore, the Gulf in a way that they haven't been able to do so. So I think that's, these couple of areas I think are sort of obvious ones and immediate ones. And then I think, again, that the Israelis and the Emiratis are going to define, further areas beyond the MOUs that they're signing to build out other ways that they can partner. And then there's a strategic element, of course, as well, which is that there is a threat from Iran. So I think you could look for technological partnering between the two countries as they confront threats, intelligence, cyber, things like that. I think those areas will get going. So all of our companies who are involved in these endeavors, I think, have some opportunities here going forward.
Thank you, Tim. I've had a number of conference calls with many companies in the last 3 weeks. And as you know well, even the way we've organized in government, companies have built firewalls traditionally, historically, between their operations and business in the Gulf and their operations and business in Israel. Many times their Israel business is part of a completely different part of the company than is the rest of the Middle East business. I've been encouraging all of them to start tearing down those barriers, those firewalls, those borders, and start trying it to the extent that they can to integrate their business between Israel and the UAE, their business units in both countries, because there's an opportunity for them to play, to be part of the connective tissue here, as you rightly point out, is going to be very, very important for the Emiratis and the Israelis themselves to build. As you know, I worked at the Pentagon for almost 20 years in different capacities, and I was actually the principal officer there for 10 years, responsible for DoD's role in maintaining Israel's qualitative military edge, or QME. And we all know that the UAE has been asking for a number of sophisticated U.S. platforms and weapon systems for a number of years, but now as part of the Abraham Accords and peace with Israel, there's an understanding or a sense on the UAE side that they should not be denied some of these systems any longer, particularly, as you pointed out in your remarks, because of the threat that we all face from Iran in the region. I wanted to ask you, within this context of weapon sales, weapon release, things that might be coming forward in the months ahead with the U.S. Congress, what's your sense of the ability for the Israelis and the Emiratis to cooperate directly and create partnerships directly on different solutions going forward? And how will U.S. policy react to that and promote it?
Great, Danny. I think we'll react very positively, and where we can, facilitate, I think we're keen to do that. I'm not talking about, spurring an arms race here at all, but I do think, as I referred to in my opening remarks, there's a legitimate threat out there. If you look at what the IRGC is saying, the way that they've reacted, the Iranian leadership to the Abraham Accords. They're shouting at everybody for betraying the Palestinians and trying to wrap themselves in that cloak. And some things that we see, are troubling. Obviously, we have our own, sort of our own issues with the IRGC funded activity. If you look at the conversations we're having with the Iraqi leadership right now about, sort of cleaning out the green zone and that kind of thing, taking a more aggressive posture to keep us from being attacked. But, we do have concerns that our Gulf partners will be under more pressure from the Iranians because of the steps that they are taking, which do, in fact, serve to isolate Iran to some extent, even more than they are, and to increase the pressure on them. So, I think it's the Emiratis anticipate that we want to be supportive with, helping them get the tools that they need to protect themselves, not necessarily to be used offensively, but to protect themselves from Iran's significant missile arsenal. But you mentioned the QME concerns, and those will be rigorously applied in this, even in this context. That's something that we are obligated by law to do. It's a rigorous process, and so all of the things that you're reading about in the press, the possible weapon systems that are under discussion, must all be viewed against that lens. And I think the second part of that is ensuring that the equipment that we sell or provide to the Emiratis, or indeed to any Gulf partner, there's absolutely no danger of technology transfer. We cannot have spillage going out of our partners and ending up in the hands of other adversaries. And so we look at the Chinese, for example, who would be very keen to understand more about the sophistication of our aircraft, of our radar systems, of our missile defense systems. So we really have to have airtight boundaries, I think, and firewalls, to use your term, against that type of spillage. So we need to be satisfied on all of those grounds, Danny, going forward.
Thank you. And let me underscore again, and from talking with all of my former colleagues in defense and the other agencies, my understanding is and this carries forward from my time in the Pentagon, we have no history of the UAE purposefully ever misusing our technology or giving it away or selling it to anyone like we might have had in the past with other countries. So I think we're in a really good place with, if I could say so, and have you agree with regard to the Emiratis of where we're starting with this. And as you know well, DOD, the Defense Department, has made a lot of efforts in the last 3 or 4 years to actually work closely with the Emiratis to bring forward a very, very strong regime in their internal systems with regard to the protection of defense technology and security and information. And I think that process is continuing forward. Any comment on that, on the history with the Emiratis on this?
Sure. I mean, the Emiratis are a great partner, and we have been, I think, quite closely lashed up in terms of our military support, our arms sales, et cetera, with the Emiratis. There has been some slippage. We look at the Yemen conflict, for example, in the past, where we've had to work with the Emiratis to, correct these situations, and so I certainly agree that the Emiratis, there's never been an intention to go around us. So I think we feel very confident in our ally here and in the type of concerns that we are raising. And here again, it's partly the concern about China that we want to make sure that those firewalls are really strong. So going forward, I think there'll be these will all be looked at by a variety of entities inside our government. This is a vigorous conversation that we will be having with the Congress. Nothing has been notified up to this point, and they obviously have an important role here to play as well. But I'm quite confident that between the track record and the intent and the threat in the region, that we'll be able to move forward on in some important areas.
Excellent, excellent, outstanding. I just want to remind viewers, if you have a question, something you want me to pose, please put it in the question bar or the chat bar, and we will have some time here at the end. But I want to pivot to China. But before we go to China, I have to raise the issue or the question of the GCC rift, because on the same day of the Abraham Accords, the same day that they were signed in Washington, September 15th, Qatar's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, was in Washington, D.C. for the third U.S.-Qatar strategic dialogue. That to me, and we talked about this on the grounds of the South Lawn a little bit at the ceremony, that to me was a little surprising. And I was immediately wondering, is there progress towards ending the Gulf Rift? Is there anything, or have we moved down the playing field at all with putting this behind us?
I wish we were in better shape than we were. Danny is someone who's lanced at this dragon for a couple of years now, and done it with different, teamed up with different envoys along the way. There are some, promising contacts, I would say, between the parties that we want to see encouraged and built up. And as you know, we floated a proposal here back at the beginning of the year, talk about opening the airspace, right? So we realize that there is a comprehensive set of problems involved in the rift that involves everything from the media space to allegations that one country or another supports the other country's dissidents. There are charges against Qatar of support for terrorism, and there's a sort of a slew of other things. There, back in the early days, of course, there were the 13 demands that were leveled against Qatar, demands that it had to meet, and so we've tried to chip away where we can and build contacts. And it hasn't led to any breakthroughs. The airspace is still closed. The land border between Qatar and Saudi Arabia is still closed. And it's unfortunate from our point of view that the rift has persisted. It's taken on a personal element as some of the networks have engaged in really scurrilous and I would say immature, baiting of the leadership, taking pot shots at particular individuals. I mean, this kind of personal animosity is not something that we, longtime observers of the Middle East are really accustomed to seeing play out in public so much. And there's concern that this will trickle down into the next generation. We've seen that sporting events, for example, have been canceled. And when you see some of the people contact intruded upon, that suggests that we're getting deeper into the rift rather than shallower. On the other hand, I mentioned some promising contacts. There was also Asian Cup soccer match that went off quite well in Qatar last year. The Emir was there to greet the teams. There have been some other events that we thought were promising and heralded potential breakthroughs, but that essential confidence, I think, which is going to come only from the parties engaging with each other, has not yet materialized. So we continue to foster and build and cajole and encourage where we can. Again, this is the rift is something that the Iranians can exploit. And we need our partners working together. There are common challenges. You talk about the immediate, I mentioned Iran, but longer term challenges, water usage, desertification, economic growth and support, mutual support for, say, the Iraqi leadership, where we want our Gulf partners working together rather than at odds with each other, supporting, emerging democratic trends in Sudan. Need our Gulf partners working together, not competing with each other. So the more that this goes on, the more we worry that it builds, tentacles that play into other regional crises that just are going to make those crises more difficult to manage.
And of course, this morning, Turkey's Erdogan announced that he's making a major visit to the region to visit partners and friends in Qatar and other places. So it just continues on in that regard too, in a more unhelpful way across the wider region. Let's pivot, Tim, to China. This is an issue that we've been having that the Business Council's been having quiet conversation with our Emirati friends and partners for many years, through the prism, if you will, of trying to always make sure that American companies have a fair shot in all the competitions and the business going on there. Yes, on Monday we hosted a webinar about the UAE's growing ties with China and its implications for U.S. businesses. Moreover, we have published a report on the same topic on the same day, which we sent you a copy of. We shared both the video of this event and the associated report with widely. Dig a little deeper for us on your concerns, the State Department's concerns, the U.S. government's concerns about China's growing presence in the Gulf. Our academics on Monday painted a picture of a wide business, trade, investment relationship, and not too much evidence of China being interested in playing a security role and taking on, as I like to say, being a provider of security in the region and not just a consumer of the security that other countries like the U.S. provide in the Gulf. How do you view the threat from China in the defense, security, cyber areas? And is there cooperation going on that folks should be more aware of and more concerned about? I'll stop there. I ask you a lot of different questions, so take your time.
Sure, Danny. I think that there are a lot of concerns on the part of the United States, and I think we see more Chinese intrusiveness into the strategic space than maybe the academics you referred to are seeing. And if you sort of look at the language that Secretary Pompeo has been using in many public appearances, he's talking about this threat very strongly. He's talking about the Chinese threat. He's talking about the intrusiveness into the telecom space, which we believe is problematic. And of course, he's talked about the human rights abuses in Xinjiang province, in particular, the repression against the Uyghur, and our kind of a striking inability that we've had so far to gain more traction on this issue from our Muslim partners in the region, who obviously also have big, China equities. But, altogether, I think the concern is that when you look at Chinese interest in building ports, Chinese interest in increasing its basing, Chinese intelligence and cyber penetration capabilities, all this presents a big challenge for the United States. And I think that, what we're trying to say is that there's a certain gray area, if you will, where the commercial relationships start to spill into the strategic space. And where that gray area is may not, fit into a nice, easy framework. And so that's where I think the contact, the coordination, the communication between us and each country is it has a different relationship with China, but where that dialogue needs to be, more vigorous. And so I think that's what we're trying to sensitize our Gulf partners to, is that what may seem to you as a straight up commercial engagement may in fact have implications for that strategic space. So that's going to be, and that it behooves us, I think, as the United States also to help our partners, understand what we're seeing and what the implications might be, because it's not an academic question. If we feel that there is too much Chinese penetration into that strategic space, that's going to lessen our ability to cooperate in very technical and very important strategic areas with these countries. So that has, that's going to have major implications. So again, we're not saying that we're not saying break relations with China. We're not saying don't trade with them, but work with us on developing, an approach that is smart and sensitive to our strategic needs.
I got it. Do you expect China to play direct? I mean, I know they're building the ports that are primarily for a commercial standpoint, but do you expect them to play with regard to having a blue water Navy presence in the Gulf in the next 5 or 10 years? Is that something that the U.S. government is projecting and worrying about, or having an Air Force base, or putting troops on the ground in a country in the region? Is that something that we're thinking about for the long term that China might do?
Well, we have to look at all those things, Danny. I think what we've seen hitherto really is that China's been a freeloader on the security infrastructure. So when we talk about, security for tankers, we see the Chinese benefiting and drafting off of our security footprint in the Gulf in ways that the Chinese mercantile effort benefits from, and yet they're not putting into that. We talked last year about building an alliance, the International Maritime Security Construct, based at our NAVSED headquarters in Bahrain. It's still a going entity, but together we felt that we need to partner with like-minded countries to secure the Gulf for all the reasons that you and I and our listeners know of, both in terms of the Straits of Hormuz, but around the corner from Oman and Yemen and up into the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. I mean, vital shipping areas to all of us and to the Chinese. So, we welcome the Chinese playing more of a positive role in terms of the security footprint, but, not in terms of, I don't think we see an immediate blue water Navy, but, in terms of looking at where we're going to be 5 and 10 years down the road, those are all things that we need to, that we need to be considering.
Thanks, Tim. And obviously, our U.S. interoperability with our Gulf partners and allies is a key to our great success there. We've had a few questions from the audience about China's promotion of 5G in the region specifically. You've touched on it. Obviously, if our friends and partners in the U.A.E. and Saudi and other places started using a Chinese telecommunication system, that would raise concerns about how we share sensitive data. Correct? Am I wrong in stating that?
That's correct. And I think you talk about 5G, and that's a particularly important area where we're trying to work with a variety of countries. And I will admit, sometimes we're playing catch up because we haven't been as focused on this space as we perhaps needed to. And I also find in our conversations that our Gulf partners may not be tracking the security implications of doing deals with 5G. And indeed, in some instances, 5G may offer a better package. Huawei may offer a better package than an Ericsson or a Nokia or some, partnership therein. But the Huawei in the 5G space in the Gulf is very problematic for us because it does get into that strategic space potentially. And that's why I think that, this kind of dialogue that we're having with our Gulf partners, with the UAE, that will feature in our strategic dialogue are absolutely essential because we want to make sure that our Gulf partners don't get too far down a road that makes it extremely awkward for them to pull back as we try to shape that space so that it is helping both of our interests.
I got it, and that leads to some other questions from the audience. I'm just going to package 2 or 3 of these together, and I think I know the answer to 1 or 2 of them. With regard to the strategic dialogue, I know that, and you have said now that China is going to be a major topic of discussion in that dialogue. Business input to the strategic dialogue, from my understanding, is going to continue to be accomplished under the economic policy dialogue, which already exists, and that will be wrapped up as a quote-unquote subgroup of business and trade and investment, the whole package of business and trade and investment issues and opportunities, that will be discussed via that group in the strategic dialogue. Is that correct?
Yes, that sounds right. And we also back over the summer, we had an economic policy dialogue with the Emiratis. Went very well. And as I said, this is a rolling strategic dialogue. This isn't a Monday, Tuesday, and we're out affair. And I think both Ambassador Akolta and I and our Emirati colleagues with whom we're working so closely on this, like the fact that it's an evolving and growing sort of organism that we can shape as we go along. And so, yeah, I mean, certainly China will be part of it, but so will other, great power competition in the Middle East. So we look at the Russians as well, but we also look at the ways that we can partner with the Emiratis on meeting some of the regional challenges, whether it's Libya, bringing the crisis in Yemen to a close, cooperating or adopting a common stance toward Lebanon to help Lebanon get on a better track, looking at the expansion of the Gulf into East Africa and the Horn of Africa. I mean, and then of course how we can further the relationships with normalization in the Gulf and what we can all do to build on the tremendous momentum that I think is being generated by the Abraham Accords. So it's hugely exciting. It's kind of daunting. This is a strong partnership already, and we're looking for ways to expand and build. None of these relationships in the Gulf, as good as they may be, can be allowed to rest on autopilot. They all have to be managed. And you need all hands on deck. And so the business community and the kinds of contacts that we will have, I think, with your members, Danny, going forward, will be very, very useful, because we're also obviously extremely attuned to ways that U.S. businesses can benefit and take advantage of some of this excitement.
Just to underscore that point, I've received many comments just on this call. But from our members, from the business community, they want to be involved. They want to play a positive role. They want to play a positive role for the U.S. and the U.A.E. and for the broader relationships. I know as you know well, from traveling to the U.A.E. so many times. I go there twice a month before COVID, and I hope to start soon again. The Emiratis aren't going to wait. To your point about relationships on hold, they're moving forward. They have a plan. They have a vision, and they are executing. And we need to be there by their side to work hand in hand with them. And our companies, our businesses, are going to continue to play a really critical role in that. Real quickly, and we're coming up sort of towards the end. I want to wrap in 2 or 3 more questions, and we'll call it a great session. Back to the China question. The person that asked the question about 5G also asked, are there other emerging technologies that China is focused on promoting in the Gulf, in Saudi, in the U.A.E. and other places that the U.S. are concerned about, that maybe they're just not getting as much airwave time as the 5G issue is? Are there any other technologies that you're worried about right now from the Chinese coming into the Gulf?
I mean, 5G and the Huawei issue is sort of numero uno for us. But I think, again, there's Chinese interest in the nuclear, civilian nuclear capability as well. And that's a space that we need to watch. So I would sort of add that to the list. And then sort of apart from the technological pieces, another area where we're being very vigilant is to challenge Chinese candidates who are vying for leadership positions in multilateral institutions, who have very different ideas from us on how organizations like the WTO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, the Postal Union. We realize that we've been caught flat-footed, and we need to get in the game to put forward. It's not always an American per se, but it's a candidate who views those organizations and wants to move them in the direction for which they were intended, and not be undermined by a Chinese a Chinese approach. So we're getting more active and more vigilant in that area as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Tim, I've got to ask this question because it's really important to some of my Emirati business members. Steel and aluminum tariffs. As you know, the UAE is still subject to these U.S. steel and aluminum tariffs. Given what's happened in the relationship just in the last number of months and the immense trade surplus that the U.S. enjoys with the UAE, are we making any progress in exempting the UAE from these tariffs that are, in my view, and in the business community's view, are sort of quite ridiculous? Thank you very much.
We haven't made a lot of progress, to be honest, and this is a recurring theme. I hear it when I go to the Gulf, and Ambassador Colt, I know, deals with this on a regular basis. You know, this is an issue that is that has been raised by the leadership. It affects several Gulf countries. The Bahrainis have raised it with us. We haven't seen a lot of movement. You know, it's possible that we could take a fresh look at it going down the road. I think, you know, there'd be some support for that. But so far, we have not been able to unlock this issue, Danny.
Well, I appreciate the response, and I appreciate that this is still on your radar and on your agenda. I would just strongly encourage that the U.S. continue to relook at this and try to figure out, especially as part of the strategic dialogue coming up on October 20th, if this can't somehow be resolved and we clear this underbrush, some of this underbrush related to this in the relationship. Tim, one last question on the region, and then we'll wrap it up with a nice human interest question. Say a few words about the Emiratis' role and the Gulf's role in Libya and Somalia, two different ends of the AOR, if you will, if I can borrow from my defense days. But really important right now, where we're going in Libya and where we're going in Somalia, and what's the U.S. saying to the Emiratis and to the Saudis and others?
Yeah, sure. You know, obviously these are two big conflict areas. They are in the case of Libya, dragging. You know, a number of outside powers are involved in the conflict: Turkey, Russia. And of course, the Emirates and Egypt as well. And, you know, we're very keen on promoting a ceasefire here. And we would like to see, you know, outside influence limited, in fact. And that's ultimately, you know, it's like pulling a scrum of rugby players apart. You got to, you know, everyone has got to get off the ball here. And it's our view that the outside influences are divergent from each other. They're creating more conflict. So our conversation with the dialogue with the Emiratis on this is to be very sensitive, in particular for ways that we might be creating space for the Russians in particular. We see their role as particularly unhelpful. You know, the Wagner forces are there, and the support that they are providing to Haftar is very troubling. That they have provided Haftar over the months has been very troubling to us. So, you know, this is another area that we have been talking to the Emiratis about. We'll continue it, but we'd like to see this conflict, you know, get on a better track. You know, using the UN under the UN lead, building a political track and sort of pushing toward a ceasefire, and then we can sort of pull the scrum apart and see if we can get some more stability there. And of course, Somalia, you know, country has been through really tough times. We now have you know, an embassy there since a little while, and you know, there's some promising signs. But Al-Shabaab is still very active, still a very threatening force. And you know, here again, we don't want to see Gulf countries working at cross purposes. So that's a conversation that we have with a number of our Gulf partners here to work together to build, you know, civilian stability inside the country and do what we can to rebuild in a coordinated fashion.
It's really interesting to me that you raised Russia, because what you just described sounds to me like former days of U.S.-Soviet competition playing out in various places like Vietnam or elsewhere in the world. And now we have different elements in the Middle East, their competition playing out in these hotspots like Libya and Somalia. And if I could say, maybe with not such a great appreciation for how well the UN could actually help to mediate or not going forward. So those are all things we obviously need to work on, and we appreciate what you're doing for sure in that regard. Last question, I'm gonna wrap up here just before the end of the hour. Take a minute, Tim, and you know, we were at the White House together on the South Lawn. We've worked our careers together in different ways and intertwined on trying to bring Arabs and Israelis together for peace. For me, it was just an amazing moment, touching, surreal for sure, against the COVID pandemic. But having spent the majority of your career working to build these relations, what does a veteran diplomat like you, a Middle East hand, say about what did you feel at the ceremony? What emotions were running through you? And then use that to pivot to talk about your hopes for the region for the future, please.
Danny, it was great to see you there, and I think it was a tremendous moment. I do think you know, I felt extremely positive about it. The one area, and you know, I think you have to give a lot of credit to our leadership and to the Israelis, to the Emirati leadership, and to the Bahrainis. I mean, this was it's not a risk-free endeavor at all. I mean, it may seem like an obvious thing to us to move in this direction, but you've seen the reaction in the Middle East. You've seen the reaction among some sectors of the populations in the Middle East, in the Gulf countries. There isn't universal support for this. You are sort of, you know, running against some currents there. Very interesting to see the comments coming out of Saudi Arabia in the last 24 hours. You know, very strong criticism of the Palestinian leadership. But you know, I do think it's a moment of hope, and I think that we will see you know, more countries join this effort because they will realize, you know, they're not doing it because of U.S. pressure, but because they realize that there is a benefit to them for a relationship with Israel, and there certainly is for Israel. Honestly, I would love to have seen more Arabs at the ceremony. A number of the diplomatic corps was invited. Some foreign ministers were invited. For various reasons, many of them did not show up. We need to build that component in there, so there's, you know, we get more support from inside the Middle East, and that's going to be a challenge for the leaderships of these countries. But I think you know, and also in talking to the Gulf leaderships, they're real keen to see tangible things, tangible progress come out of this, because they know that they need to demonstrate this to the skeptics and to the naysayers. And I also think there is a commitment, as articulated by our Gulf partners, to finding ways to bring the Palestinians into the conversation in a way that they have not felt that they are able to do so, and that's going to be a huge issue, and that will take the narrative away from the Iranians and others who just want to spill, you know, venom toward this whole idea. I think, you know, we'll build more support together, and that will be I think that will add to the promising element of this for the region.
Deputy Assistant Secretary Lenderking, thank you very, very much today, and for ending on that hopeful note about the future. My understanding and everything that you're saying and that we're seeing is that this time around we want to achieve a warm peace, not a cold peace. And it's clear to me that we have a new start down that road. And I am very, very hopeful that that's where we will end up. Mabruk, Beseder Gamor, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate your effort and the great effort of all of your ambassadors and their teams in the region. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Look forward to talking with you soon.
You bet. Thanks a lot, Danny. Thanks, everybody.